What's up everyone, and we're back with part 3 of the Space and Astrophysics Iceberg. I know I said I planned another video before this one came out, but I've run into some production issues with it, so I decided to postpone it for now. But of course, keep an eye out if you're into spooky lore and whatnot, just a little hint of what comes next. Anyway, I'm going to keep the intro short because the next two tiers have a lot to talk about, but before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoy, and let's begin. Now, Tier 5 begins with interstellar journey times. Interstellar journey times has to do with how long a trip through interstellar space would be with current technology. The distance between stars is measured in light years, and 1 light year is equal to 9.46 times 10 to the 12th kilometers, or 5.88 times 10 to the 12 miles. At the rate of about 17 kilometers per second, or 38,000 miles per hour, it would take a spacecraft over 70,000 years to reach the nearest star Proxima Centauri, about 4.25 light years from us. So if we were to somehow be able to travel at light speed, this same trip would still take more than 4 years. So unless groundbreaking advancements are made in physics, it's unlikely humans will visit other stars anytime soon. And this gets a 3 out of 10 because of massive distance and timescales. The N-1 secret moon rocket was a rocket designed by the Soviet Union to put a man on the moon, specifically the N-1L3. Its development and the existence of the Soviet lunar program was a complete government secret until the collapse of the USSR in the 90s, but of course, the US was well aware of it. The N-1 began development in the early 60s, and by the end of the decade, it was supposedly ready for launch. However, the N-1 never flew into space, as all 4 of its launches were a complete failure, with some people on the ground even being killed after the first attempt in 1969. Because of the failures, the program was eventually cancelled in the mid-1970s and covered up until the Soviet Union fell. Some of the scrapped engines were then sold to American companies for various uses, and it was not used for space flights until 2013, when one of the engine types was used in the Soyuz 2.1 rocket, and the secret moon rocket gets a 2 out of 10. The Lost Cosmonauts conspiracy theory is a conspiracy that says that the Soviets and Russians have covered up a lot of deaths of their cosmonauts. It's said that before Yuri Gagarin, the Soviets tried to launch many more people into space, but none survived and those incidents have been covered up. A lot of proposed deaths have been hoaxes, and most of them have absolutely no evidence. There was even an American journalist who investigated space-related deaths, and even he didn't find anything. But that's not to say that the Soviet government is beyond covering up deaths, as they covered up the death of Valentin Bondarenko, who was supposed to be a cosmonaut but was killed on Earth after a training session in March of 1961. What basically happened was he was making a cup of tea on a hot plate, and after cleaning his body with a cotton ball soaked in alcohol, he threw the cotton away and it landed on the hot plate. The cotton ball caught fire, and as Valentin tried to put it out, his clothes caught fire as well. He suffered third-degree burns all over his body and died of shock just hours later. What's interesting to note is that the accident happened in a low-pressure altitude chamber which was pressurized with 50% oxygen, which is why the fire burned so strongly. Nevertheless, why cover up his death and potentially the ones of many others? And for that, the conspiracy gets a 4 out of 10 because shady government. Moon dust is dangerous refers to how lunar soil is highly damaging to human tissue. Moon soil itself is made of igneous rock, weathered over time by meteorite impacts and solar radiation, processes which do not turn it into the kind of soil we see on Earth. The soil even has a relatively high amount of small iron particles in it, making it extremely abrasive and would effectively be like breathing in asbestos if you were to inhale it. The dust is also a hazard for technology, with it having the potential to damage machinery, spacesuits, solar panels, and other important parts of things built on the moon. Moon dust is a 2 out of 10 because we likely won't have to deal with it, but the thought of accidentally huffing glass dust makes me uneasy. Diamond planets are a type of exoplanet which are made almost entirely of diamond, which itself is highly heated and pressurized carbon, giving it a crystalline structure. The main planet in question is named 55 Cancri E, which very closely orbits its star 55 Cancri A. In fact, it orbits the star much closer than Mercury orbits our sun, and because of this, the planet is constantly blasted with temperatures of more than 2,000 degrees Kelvin, which allows diamond to form from the high amount of carbon on the planet. With its mass being almost 8 times as much as Earth, it has been estimated that its cash value on Earth would be nearly $17 nonillion. That's 27 with 30 zeros behind it. Overall, 1 out of 10 and a pretty cool finding, but not concerning. Solar sails are a form of space technology that uses radiation from the sun on a surface in order to propel an object such as a spacecraft. This would operate like the sail of a sailboat works in the wind, but it would need to be a reflective surface like foil or a large mirror. Recently, the concept of refractive solar sails has gained support, with one particular project gaining support from NASA. In 2010, the Japanese space agency JAXA successfully launched the spacecraft Icaros, the first craft to feature solar sail technology. The mission was a success, showing that the craft was indeed accelerating from radiation interacting with its solar sail. Overall, the entry gets a 1 out of 10, not concerning at all, just some great technology. The acceleration and gravity equivalence is a physics concept that is a bit difficult to explain without a demonstration, but I'll do my best in words and diagrams. Basically, the gravity of a planet such as Earth pulls things down at a constant rate, in our case 9.8 meters per second squared. If you had a mass on a rocket or an elevator, and you accelerated that rocket or elevator upward at the same rate of 9.8 meters per second squared, dropping the mass in that vehicle would cause it to accelerate downward at the same rate as on Earth. Thus, the acceleration due to the upward object is the exact same as the gravitational pull on Earth, as long as that object travels at 9.8 meters per second squared. Now, way smarter people have made videos explaining this in detail, so I'll link one of those in the description in case my explanation wasn't clear or even correct. Despite that, this is just physics, so it gets a 1 out of 10. Titan lakes refers to the many lakes present on Saturn's moon Titan. These don't hold water, but are instead filled with liquid ethane and methane. These were hypothesized to exist when astronomers viewed data from Hubble, but were not confirmed until the Huygens probe landed on Titan as part of the Cassini-Huygens mission. The lakes are mostly concentrated near the poles of the moon, with some even being as large as Lake Michigan. Cassini later revealed that the deepest lakes were probably more than 300 feet deep, or about 90 meters. What's interesting about the lakes in general is that ethane and methane are hydrocarbons, which are sometimes produced by organic processes. This isn't exactly proof that there is life on Titan, but because some microorganisms on Earth called extremophiles are known to survive in places like deep sea vents and even ice, who's to say that a different kind of life couldn't have developed on Titan? For that, it gets a 2 out of 10, but not by much. Now, the next entry is cosmic inflation, and first of all, I'm so glad that the word cosmic is attached to this for the context of the video, but basically, cosmic inflation is a theory that has to do with the exponential expansion of the universe just as it came into existence. This initial expansion of the universe would have been extremely brief, lasting only a small fraction of a second. Nevertheless, the speed of the expansion would have been light speed. This theory was proposed because of an interesting dilemma. The temperature of cosmic background radiation supposedly left over from the Big Bang is oddly uniform everywhere in the universe. This would mean that the temperature of the universe must have been uniform at some point, which required the energy of the universe to be very close together. After reaching some sort of equilibrium within itself, the universe would have then expanded evenly, and thus its radiation. Again, another fairly complex topic that I'm very not qualified to talk about, but here we are. Cosmic inflation gets a 3 out of 10 because it involves supposed incomprehensible events a stupidly long time ago. The flags on the moon are now white is a sadly true fact, as the 6 flags left by the Apollo missions have been exposed to UV radiation from the sun for more than 50 years at this point. What happens is the light from the sun has bleached the flag's color away, and what's more is that the nylon material the flags are made of has probably broken down in some of them. If you remember back to the micrometeorite entry, these may also have hit the flags over the decades, effectively leaving them in ruins. However, in 2011, it was confirmed that at least 3 flags are still casting their shadows on the surface of the moon, despite likely having faded away. So yeah, 3 French flags on the moon gets a 0 out of 10. Apollo 1 was supposed to be the first manned mission of the Apollo program, but sadly ended in disaster during a launch rehearsal the month before the launch was scheduled. During this rehearsal, an electrical fire in the cabin quickly spread due to the oxygen-rich environment, leading to the asphyxiation of all 3 men on board. These were Commander Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee. The worst part is they could have been saved had their cabin been prepared with the proper escape mechanisms. It is said that the hatch to the cabin was sealed shut, and it took 5 minutes for all 3 hatches to be opened by the crew outside. Today the capsule is in storage at Langley Research Center, but the hatch that trapped the men inside was put on display at Kennedy Space Center in 2017. And this entry gets a 4 out of 10 for the tragic loss of 3 brave men. The WOW signal. On August 15 of 1977, a strong radio signal was detected by the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University. A few days later, astronomer Jerry Eman discovered the data and wrote a big WOW on the paper next to the signal. Now, at the time the radio telescope was being used to try and detect signals from intelligent life, the signal supposedly originated from a region of the sky near the Sagittarius constellation, but its exact origins are unknown. A lot of theories have been put forth as to what produced it, with some saying it is concrete evidence of aliens. Eamon eventually said it could have just been the signal from Earth bouncing off of space junk, but the thing is that the signal was only detected that one time and never again, and this makes it kind of hard to validate as evidence of alien life. It should also be noted that a more sensitive radio telescope in New Mexico didn't detect the signal at all, so whatever it was managed to only be detected by Big Ear and nothing else, which raises several questions. The Sentry gets a 2 out of 10 since the limited evidence suggests it's unlikely the signal was anything of high importance, but it still leaves questions as to what made the signal. Mir incidents. The Mir was a Soviet and later Russian space station operating from 1986 to 2001. It was the largest space station before the ISS. The entry refers to a number of major accidents that happened related to the space station. The first of these was a 90-second fire that occurred when a backup oxygen generator malfunctioned and filled the Mir with smoke. This led to the entire crew putting on respirator masks, some of which were broken, and to top it all off, the fire extinguishers couldn't even be taken off the walls. The next two incidents happened while testing a manual docking system with two of the station's resupply modules. When attempting to dock the first resupply module, the docking system failed and the module almost crashed into the station. When attempting to dock the second module, the system failed again, and this time the resupply module severely damaged a module called Spectre connected to the space station. This caused the entire space station to depressurize, and Spectre had to be sealed off for good because of the damage. And if that wasn't enough, the crash also damaged a lot of the solar panels, which caused a power crisis for multiple weeks throughout the entire station. Eventually, the Mir was abandoned and replaced by the ISS, after which the entire station disintegrated when re-entering the atmosphere. The Mir incident gets a 3 out of 10 because it's scary to think about any sort of critical accident in space in general. Now, Tier 6 begins with Vladimir Komarov's sacrifice. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet pilot who, like Yuri Gagarin, was selected to be part of the Soviet space program. On April 23rd of 1967, Komarov was commanding the Soyuz 1 spacecraft as a part of a series of missions, but many of the systems on board the craft malfunctioned to the point where a second Soyuz launch was supposed to meet up with the Soyuz 1, but was cancelled. Because of this, the mission was aborted while Komarov was still in orbit, but the Soyuz 1 was malfunctioning so badly that he had to manually reorient the module so that he would re-enter the Earth's atmosphere safely. Komarov was able to do this perfectly, but in a cruel twist of fate, the parachute meant to bring him down to Earth safely didn't deploy. As a result, Komarov's module crash landed on Earth, killing him instantly. The sacrifice part could be interpreted in two ways. The first of these is Komarov's sacrifice to spaceflight as a whole, which is true no matter how you interpret it. His death was the first spaceflight-related casualty in history, and the technical mistakes made by Soviet engineers on the Soyuz undoubtedly serve as a reminder that the lives we send on these missions are valuable and we must do everything to protect them in the hostility of space. The second sacrifice is unconfirmed, but it is said that Komarov knew or at least suspected that the Soyuz 1 was unsafe. According to some, Komarov volunteered to go on the mission instead of Gagarin, who he was good friends with, sacrificing his life for his friend. His sacrifice gets a 4 out of 10 for the loss of a brave man. Gay astronauts refers to how a few astronauts are confirmed to have been LGBT, with others only being thought to be. The three confirmed are Sally Ride, who was the first American woman in space and flew on a number of missions; Anne McClain, who was flown to the ISS and will be part of the Artemis crew to go to the moon for the first time in decades; and Wendy B. Lawrence, who flew on several space shuttle missions in the late 90s and 2005. But overall, I'll give the Century a 0 out of 10. Quasars are the celestial phenomena at the center of some galaxies. They are described as the interaction between the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy and the matter around it. As we went over in the black hole entry, gas entering a black hole produces large amounts of radiation that shoots out of the black hole. This makes the center of the galaxy glow super brightly, with some even glowing much more than entire other galaxies. The word quasar itself comes from the term quasi-stellar radio source, and they were first discovered in the 50s because of the massive amounts of radiation they produced. That amount of radiation, of course, depends on the size of the black hole, as well as things like how the galaxy itself is oriented and the amount of gas being pulled in. Quasars get a 7 out of 10. You know how I feel about black holes, and the heavy radiation is not helping. The Carrington event occurred in September of 1859. It was essentially the strongest geomagnetic storm ever recorded, with its effect being seen around the world in multiple ways. For example, the aurora we see near the Earth's poles were seen around the entire planet, and some telegraph stations sparked and even caught on fire. The reason behind the event was likely a large solar flare that launched solar wind towards the Earth. This solar wind carried some of the sun's magnetic field, which then interacted with the Earth's own magnetic field and caused all sorts of fun stuff to happen in the atmosphere and on the ground. What's concerning is that a storm like this hitting the Earth today would bring a lot more chaos because of our electronics and how we depend on them. Everything from power grids to satellites would be greatly damaged, leaving millions of people without electricity and communication. This is not to mention technology used to produce food, leading many to think that a modern Carrington event will likely cause major world conflicts and other unpleasant consequences. Because of that, the Carrington event gets a 6 out of 10. Tabby's star is a star a bit larger than the Sun, about 1,400 light-years away from Earth in the constellation Cygnus. It's likely on the Iceberg because in 2017, the Kepler Space Telescope detected odd light fluctuations from Tabby's star. Kepler was designed to detect exoplanets, but the amount of fluctuations scientists saw from Tabby's star didn't quite line up with that. Some people have even suggested that the light fluctuation came from some sort of alien megastructure that blocked out the light from the star, but we have no concrete evidence of this. So far, astronomers have recorded 5 major dimming events, all in 2017. An answer to the dimmings was suggested in 2019, with astronomers putting forth the idea that an exomoon in the star system was somehow disrupted from its planet. This would have involved a very large collision, the debris of which could have caused the dimmings. Overall, Tabby's star gets a 1 out of 10. Saturn's rings will disappear. Now, Saturn's rings are able to orbit the planet because of how gravity and orbital speeds work together. However, the small particles making up the rings are also subject to radiation from the sun, which changes their electrical charge to be attracted by Saturn's massive magnetic field. Millions of years of both this and patterns in gravity will cause Saturn's rings to eventually fall into the planet, and according to NASA, will completely disappear in less than 100 million years. So if you're somehow immortal, enjoy these while you can, and this gets a 2 out of 10. Solar eclipses are a coincidence refers to how total solar eclipses on Earth are even possible in the first place. The sun is about 400 times as wide as the moon, but also 400 times further away from Earth. Now this means that they have the same size ratio when looked at in the sky. This is a complete coincidence, as the relative distance away from Earth just so happens to be the same ratio as their relative size. So yeah, we got a high roll with that one, and I'll give it a 1 out of 10, I guess. Gravity is not a force is another very complicated topic in physics, but again, I'm gonna do my best. The physics definition of a force is a push or a pull that comes from the interaction between multiple objects. Gravity does not exactly fulfill this definition, as gravity does not require objects to directly interact for them to feel each other's influence. The interaction instead comes from the mass of the objects, which somehow causes them to be attracted to each other. Now let's say you have 2 large objects in space moving towards each other. Each of the objects is large enough so that the other can feel its pull, but neither are directly interacting. This is because gravity distorts time and space around it, so a large mass is sort of making space wrinkle in on itself, and any objects in this sphere of influence are then accelerated towards the large mass. Regardless, gravity is still considered a fundamental force by physics, and its interaction with space is highly studied. The entry itself isn't exactly concerning, but given that we don't know the nature of gravity that well, I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Martian canals. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, when telescope technology wasn't advanced, astronomers noticed that there appeared to be canals on the surface of Mars. What they were seeing were straight lines and curved paths along the planet's surface. These were thought by some to be made by alien life to transport water from the poles, but it was later found that these canals were just optical illusions. What happens is that telescopes have to gather light that has been distorted by the Earth's atmosphere, millions of miles of space, and finally Mars' own atmosphere. This of course would have messed with their observations given the limited quality of their telescopes. Eventually though, we were able to definitively map the surface of Mars and proved without a doubt that there are no canals. A cool bit of history, but it gets a 0 out of 10. Space-time might be four-dimensional. Okay, here we go again. Now, you and I are used to three-dimensional objects described by their length, width, and height. But because the moment in time that an object exists at any particular location is a property of that object, time must also be a dimension. Think of the coordinates in a Minecraft world and make time a fourth coordinate. The odd thing is that depending on the speed of the observer, events in time may seem different. Let's say you have a light bulb in the middle of a very dark room and two mirrors on opposite sides of the room, and then make it so that the light is visible on both mirrors when you turn it on. You as a stationary observer see the light bulb appear in both mirrors at the same time because the speed of light does not change. However, if your friend was traveling at half the speed of light towards one of the mirrors, they would see the light bulb in that mirror appear before it appears in the other mirror. This is because of relativity, a concept proposed by Albert Einstein. Basically, the closer you approach the speed of light, the more differently you perceive time. However, we can't perceive objects in the fourth dimension as three-dimensional beings because we simply can't see past the third dimension. Our eyes are able to perceive objects in 3D because they put together a series of 2D images in order to make an object have depth. This entry can sort of be reworded as space-time is four-dimensional, but we can't detect it visually. Again, people smarter than me can explain it much better, so check out the video in the description because I undoubtedly got a lot of this wrong. But overall, 4D space-time is going to get an 8 out of 10 for an absolute brain blast of a physics topic. Buran refers to both the Soviet/Russian spacecraft equivalent of the American space shuttle and the program it belonged to. The program began in 1974 and developed the Buran to be an orbiter able to re-enter the atmosphere, much like the ones developed by NASA. However, unlike the orbiter sent by NASA, it could land automatically without a pilot. It only flew once without a crew in November of 1988 and orbited the Earth twice before landing. The Buran never flew again though, as the program lost a lot of its funding after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Eventually, the whole program was shut down in 1993, and in 2002, the roof of the hangar that still contained the Buran fell on the orbiter and destroyed it. Kinda sad for the Russian space program, so I'll give it a 1 out of 10. The Soyuz 11 was a Soviet crewed mission that boarded the first ever space station, Salyut-1, in 1971. Now, I'm sorry if I butcher these names, but on board were Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. The mission went relatively smooth until the crew were supposed to come back to Earth. It seemed that everything went well during re-entry and the capsule was undamaged when the men were retrieved, but all three had tragically died. Investigation found that the men had suffocated after a valve supposedly loosened a pressurization seal. This caused the oxygen in the cabin to rush out at an altitude of more than 100 miles, in which there is no breathable air. Oxygen ran out in less than a minute, and there was unfortunately no way for them to fix the problem before they began to asphyxiate. By the way, all cosmonauts who died in space-related accidents were buried in the Kremlin-walled necropolis and given ceremonious funerals by the state. Say what you will about the USSR, but at least the people who died in these tragedies got the recognition and respect they deserved. And of course, I'll give the entry a 4 out of 10 for their tragic deaths. Human ashes in the outer solar system refers to a portion of the ashes of astronomer Clyde Tombaugh being sent out into space aboard the New Horizons mission. Now, Clyde Tombaugh was an American astronomer who discovered Pluto in 1930, among other space objects. He died in 1997 and was cremated, after which some of his ashes were sent on New Horizons in 2006. In 2015, New Horizons closely approached Pluto, honoring Tombaugh in the process. New Horizons is currently flying far beyond the orbit of Pluto, taking Tombaugh's ashes deep into the Kuiper Belt and beyond. Nothing concerning, but a nice touch for the legacy of an important astronomer. 0 out of 10. And that's going to be the end of part 3. These 2 tiers were just a taste of what comes next, so I hope you're ready for things like dark energy, string theory, and topics like that coming up in the next tiers. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like and sub, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned for part 4 coming out soon, and of course the other video I promised. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.